Thank you, Nastasia, and Denise, and Tom, and the whole team. It's a pleasure to join you here, especially with such a big room. It's always nerve-inducing when you're on the second stage. You walk and see the big stage, and you look in, and it's an empty room, and you think, who will come here? Why would they come here? But it's a pleasure to come and share some of this research with you. So I'm going to talk a bit about transparency and control for personalized AI. And it's a pleasure to actually share a lot of insights from a whole program of research we've been doing, sections of it here, both the expert and the user research parts in Berlin, in one of my favorite cities. So thanks for having us. So first, I'll just introduce a bit what TTC Labs, which is the Trust, Transparency, and Control Labs at Meta, is, and where it came from. It came from, Tom told me there was a delay, so I'm going to hit this and then it'll move. Or will it? Yes, it will. It came from a simple observation. When I came to Meta almost 9 years ago, we started thinking about the user experience of privacy. And very, very quickly, it was obvious that there were two very different worlds that spoke about the privacy kind of experience. There was a world of law and policy, and their terminology was very driven by kind of rights and what was written in code. And there was a world of technologists, a world where they were thinking of the experience people had. And very often, they didn't meet. Like, they were talking about the same experiences, the same digital product we were building, but they spoke completely different languages. It wasn't even necessary that they disagreed. They had very different terminology, terms of reference, metrics even for success. Like, if you talk to a law professor specializing in privacy about adoption rates and click-throughs and how people use the service or where they get frustrated, it just didn't compute. It was not part of the terminology. You could go a very, very long way in these fields without thinking about those questions. And similarly, if you're a product designer or a product maker, you don't really think about the terminology that people use or how to protect their rights necessarily. These are not the kind of practices that you have at hand. So we thought, how could we bring these groups together? And we built a co-design lab. And actually, our very first kind of experiment, the prototype for that work, was here in Berlin 8 years ago. And the idea is to design kind of experiences and prototype what does good look like that brings together these two different worlds, these two different sets of ways of thinking, and asks them to meet each other. So the way we do that, we bring together product makers, designers, UX, policymakers, legal experts, researchers, and content strategy. We run what are called design jams, and we sprint together on kind of finding answers to that. And we try to bring users into that space, sometimes directly, so we work with actual users in the engagements. Very often, we're bringing user research. And what I'm going to talk about today is kind of insights from a program of user research. It's very large scale, and also expert co-design through that practice. Oh, yeah. And what we're asking them to do is to say, what does the experience look like? Because actually, when you talk about the major debates about privacy and data, especially in a fast-moving space like AI, it spirals quickly. But ultimately today, that experience is all mediated through the device. And when you talk about to people about the device, what the experience should be, it creates compromises and challenges, but in a useful way. And we start thinking, okay, what should it look like? What would a user experience? What would they enjoy? How can they use it? And it's very, very fruitful. I've got to do this. I've got to point it that way. So a little bit about the approach. What I'm going to share today is the kind of synthesis from 16 different user research studies, a lot of it in the US, but also across Europe and Africa, Latin America, and Asia, including Berlin, or Germany, I should say, and the expert co-design work, which we did in Brussels in March, in Paris in April, in Berlin in May, in Dublin in June, at home for me, and around 15 to 25 experts. And we bring together like our product teams and researchers together with kind of external experts, people from think tanks, academia, people from kind of law and policy fields, people with very different views, different languages. And we say, what does good look like? What are the right experiences? And we capture feedback about different designs. We use cases based on the research. So we take those user research insights, and we create kind of personas and use cases, ways that people use the services, ways that we think in the future they might use these AI-driven services, especially around personalization, and we create personas across these common use cases. And they're grounded in common topics, like the typical ways people use these kind of AI assistants. But we were really, really focused in particular on personalization of AI. And the next iterations of this technology will be increasingly personalized across a range of different approaches. And I'll speak in a few minutes about what that looks like. And then we also share prototype concepts. Some of those are designs that we internally are thinking about, like do we take this direction or that direction? Is this an experience that works? Is this the right way to realize what we think is the right way to approach this? Is this the right approach to a control or transparency? And we capture feedback. We talk to users about it, we talk to experts about it, and we say what works about this and what doesn't. Some of the things are maybe prototype experiences we're building, some are closer to, some are more conceptual, and they're not branded as meta designs as such. We're more thinking, what does the future look like for these technologies 1 and 2 and maybe 5 years out? So, some insights. First question, what does personalization look like for AI experiences? And I think when we think about this question, like already we're seeing the first iteration of personalization of AI experiences. It looks kind of simple, right? This is a quote from a research participant. It should certainly save some things. I don't want to start from scratch every time. And when you think of just your AI assistant remembering what you told it before, that's the first iteration of personalization, and it's incredibly useful. It's really actually hard to imagine. Almost as soon as it was kind of brought into the product experiences, you saw it proliferate across different kind of competitors and apps, and it becomes a kind of a capability that is both novel and powerful and completely necessary. It's part of your experience. You expect it to happen. But there's a wider range of what this could look like. So when we talk to users about these kinds of areas of personalization, and this is non-comprehensive, but kind of synthesizing lots of findings. When an AI knows or remembers specific information, it can better help participants achieve their goals. When we're thinking of assistance and we're thinking of Meta's kind of goals to empower users, we're really thinking like, what's the end goal you're trying to get to, and how can we help you achieve that? So things like shopping, like what your favorite shops are, what brands you're interested in maybe. When you're learning, like what's your skill level? How should I talk to you? How should I communicate? How should I give advice? What makes sense to you like this? Giving specialized advice, maybe you have fitness goals and you're a triathlete and you're looking for specific information. It knows what you've done in the past. It knows maybe where you've struggled. When you're writing emails and docs, when you've maybe iterated in the past and said, no, not like that, I don't talk like that, that's not my way of communicating, it can iterate for you. And then planning and coordinating, maybe ingesting information from other places. Like if I want to plan my couple of days in Berlin while I'm here for the conference, it's really useful if it knows my calendar, knows my availability. And that also has big privacy concerns, right? You bring more data in, and you can personalize based on that, and you've got to figure out what's the right transparency, the right control and approach to that. And indeed, this example, context for who is the right Bob to invite. So can it understand and like not have that experience of, you're talking to a voice assistant and it's 5 times to get the right person, and you go, of course it's this person. And I think that's the big challenge. So it kind of buckets into 3 big categories when we looked at it. And again, across a lot of experiences, but for the purposes today. The first is relevance, so making the answers relevant to you. The second is speed, like it speeds up the process. You don't have to prompt and prompt and prompt again to get answers. And the third is connection. So relevance, really frequently we heard from participants, when the AI remembers key information about their interests and preferences, it gives better and more relevant answers, right? If it's able to pull the right information in, if it has the right sources, it's bringing context. And a user said, I know this is a quote actually we've talked about a lot. It could mention more specific things like cafe names or specific buildings, the kinds of things a real Berliner would know. And it goes from pulling from the general internet into, it knows what I might be interested in, the kind of recommendation I could get from that friend who's just traveled to a city, just had a great experience and knows the kind of food I like, the kind of places I want to visit, the museum I might know, and says, oh, I know what you would be interested in. That kind of experience is quite magical, but it's also really useful. It's quick, right? I don't have to prompt and prompt again. The second is speed. So that again is that process of not quite right. And sometimes that experience is useful and good when you're engaging in kind of in dialogue with an AI assistant and you're working through your process of thinking. But sometimes you also want to get closer to the right answer quicker, especially as your kind of experience goes on, especially as you become more used to using that experience and you're thinking, I've given you all the information you need. I want you to pull from our history. I want you to pull in other data sources and give me better answers quicker. So I ask it something, I have to say, make it shorter, make it look like human language. Please remember the kinds of guidance that I give and try to get quicker to the answer. And that, again, is the impact of personalization. It's remembering past histories and interactions, iterating based on that, and giving me more useful answers, and saving me time, and getting better responses. And then the last piece is connection. So the kind of like what the experience is and how useful it is and relevant it is to me, more immediate and relevant responses, and also more engagement, right? It makes you feel more connected to it. It feels like you're getting answers that are relevant to you, and not I have kind of a search bot that is going out to the internet pulling in something to answer, but it's trying to kind of serve my end goal, serve what I'm trying to get to at the end. So really, when I think about this, it's that data creates context. And of course, answering any question, whether you're a person or an AI, context really matters, right? The same way that if someone asks you a question and you say, whoa, what are we talking about? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And suddenly it clicks, you go, okay, I know what you need. I know what kind of recommendation to give you. I know how to answer the question. And you go from like someone asking a question that's in their head, but you don't really know what drives it, into, okay, I see where they're trying to go, and I can help you kind of get there. So something I think is important as we go into this next phase. Today, it's kind of the first iterations of things like memory, which are the kind of like very necessary. It remembers what I told it yesterday, and I think that's an expectation that's set very quickly. But personalization is not like a single thing. You know, we won't have AI, and then we have personalized AI. I think successively over the next 5 years, we'll see progressively more personalized experiences. And if you think about all the different things you could collect in that experience, where AI becomes kind of the operating system for how you collect knowledge and have it serve your end goals, you have a proliferation of data sources that also creates challenges, right? Where did that information come from? How is it personalized to me? Am I getting different answers to someone else? Maybe for good reasons like we just talked about. But the kind of stages of this will be very progressive, and also the level of complexity is very high. So think of something relatively simple like integrating a calendar. And these are things that if we think of, operating system integrations for calendars, you have it at the OS level today, right? You can pull your calendar information from Google into Apple or whatever. But the data kind of implications are quite significant as well. What if it pulls the wrong information? What assumptions is it making? What might it know about me or my day? In ways that could be very privacy invasive, right? And on what parameters do you have controls for that? Is it you allow the AI to access it for a given time? Is it only certain kinds of events? Do you have a privacy mode? All of that is to be discovered and designed over the next years. And it's quite different because unlike a database, you can't have strict kind of controls. You have an AI that can interpret unstructured knowledge in a different way. So it's very progressive as the underlying capabilities develop. We build better models, and that provides better interpretability, but also kind of increases the scope and scale of what you can understand. So many privacy concerns that go with that, right? The first one is inaccuracy. So imagine you have this personalized experience. It's drawing in different kinds of data sources in different places, maybe just from memory, but also other places. And it gives me inaccurate mistakes. It makes assumptions, maybe from a past conversation, and it's giving me a personalized response. That's a concern, right? It's overreaching. Maybe it's trying to do too much. And there's a certain point where you say, like, OK, yeah. I know you're trying to give me the kind of end goal, get to what I want to get to, but let's work through the steps here. I want to govern this. I don't want you kind of like running away with things. And especially as we get into agentic capabilities as well, right? You want to understand the scope and constraints. And things like even visualization of the kind of like steps of thinking for an AI are very useful for that. So if you've done any kind of vibe coding capabilities, you see when it's going off track and you go, whoa, stop. But visualization is important. Transparency is important. And then privacy impacts. Using information in ways I don't understand. And maybe as you interact with it, what you could kind of draw in and what you could access is quite broad, and it might challenge the interface. So, where am I? I'm actually on time-ish, against all the odds. Never happened. Some opportunities for design and product. And these are some of the things we're thinking about. I'd love for you to think about, because it's kind of a challenge across the industry for how we solve these areas. The first is, the connection between personalization and usefulness is really clear across both users and experts. And even as I spoke here, when we look through those different use cases, a lot of nodding heads. And that's not taken for granted, actually, because like personalization, different experiences, are challenging in different ways, especially for the privacy impacts. But I think that when we talk to people about, hey, what if your AI could understand this or draw on this information, people can pretty quickly ping in to understand, oh yeah, I can see how that would be useful, even though it creates challenges for controls. And similarly, when we talk to experts, people who are deeply engaged in privacy, they're really kind of thinking, well, yeah, like we need to find the right balancing approaches, we need to find the right constraints, but I can see where you're trying to go with this and what the value could be. Even as kind of governing and controlling and providing transparency, much of this needs to be created anew, because once we've proliferated so many different controls and transparency across different kinds of surfaces, but now you have a very simple interface, and kind of understanding how do you contextually give information about that and give controls needs novel approaches. But there are some opportunities there too. Similarly, the product capabilities are moving very fast. I remember when we started this work, we were working on the first iterations of memory, right? And you were seeing, I think maybe concurrently, OpenAI was launching memory features globally, which initially were kind of launched across the board. And they said, like, okay, here's the way you control this. Like, here are things we're remembering. Here's a list of terms. But once you think about how often you might interact with your AI, the scope of that increases really quickly. Like, how many things might it remember if I think of all the queries I have over a course of a week, a month, and now years? It can quickly get into a very long scope. So do you gather that information? Do you group it? And in what ways? Is it things I know about your preferences? Is it things I know about this? Is it things you told me you're interested in? And it becomes kind of a little bit less tractable very quickly. And those kinds of problems are important. Things that work well at a small scale, but that you realize you kind of outpace the scope. And then simultaneously, in the underlying capabilities of the models, context windows got much, much larger. So you went from, we're pulling out information from your past chats to remember things, they become memories over here, into, actually, we can kind of remember everything from your past chats, because that is a kind of defined scope of information, and it's easy to feed that back into the prompt and give that back to somebody. So how do you then control that? How do you then say, we're personalizing here? Maybe you use interface design, so when you pull on some information, you lead with that, and you tell them, because of your interest in X or Y. But that's useful, I think. It's very good at building a mental model. It's also a little bit less predictable, right? It's not a single design. And how do you reconcile that with kind of legal and policy requirements for transparency, where you're doing it maybe not perfectly comprehensively, even if you're doing it as like, I'm teaching my user where information comes from and giving them a chance to control it. So very, very quickly for people who are designing in the space of transparency and control, you've got to think, yes, we designed for today, but we've got to look further ahead and understand the trajectory. And also, as the model capabilities change, the kind of requirements and challenges change also. With that, there's really big opportunities for in-context transparency. So because you have this broadly a single type of interface, which is like a chat, there's really good ways to say, hey, this is how we'll offer you context on that. And you can maybe look at a response, and we think of kind of giving that information like we're personalizing on this basis or telling you this. Entry points are kind of challenging, so you don't have single entry points into controls. Maybe it'll have to be persistent. And that's kind of a little bit of a difficult thing, because you don't want to clutter that nice interface in ways that present barriers to people or kind of fuzz up what they're trying to get to. Progressive disclosure, which is the space of giving people more information if they want it, and progressively kind of like giving transparency about things, is a really natural fit for LLMs. Imagine if when you get a privacy notice, you can say, just give me the summary, tell me the key points, or tell me more about that. What does that mean? How do I get into this? It's a really good fit, right? In ways that today, the kind of like legalistic approaches of like, we give you full long notices, people skip a lot of it, and it's very difficult to find what you pull out, and there's some kind of like incentives internally around risk management, where you're better off being kind of very comprehensive, and that can narrow a bit the scope of like what you're telling people that's really important to them. And those pressures could frustrate this, so we've got to find the right way to do progressive disclosure that leverages the kind of capabilities of the models without also running into legal risks. What we call, why am I seeing this, or waste is what we call it in Meta. But if you think of this as like, I'm getting maybe it's a feed item, and I can click on it and say, why did I receive this answer? Is enormously powerful. We had excellent feedback from both users and from experts about this. And on the one hand, it's retrospective. It's, I got an answer, and now I can look at it and say, why did I get this answer? How did you personalize it? What sources could it draw on? But what it does is give people a mental model to say, oh, okay, so it's pulling information from here and it's doing this and it's personalizing based on this. And that ultimately is what's powerful about that approach. So I think there's lots of space for progression about like giving people a mental model that ultimately empowers them, gives them controls. And it's the entry point into how to control this once you understand how it works. And then finally, the voice-first interfaces. We did some work as well on, imagine if you have no screen. And that was extremely interesting and powerful, but it also breaks every mechanism we have for transparency and control currently, because we are really oriented toward, like, the industry has iterated to a single design for these experiences. And if you're in voice, what does that look like? Because it's linear, you can't like skip through things, and it's serial, it's one word after another. So that's what we're working on next. So I think that's just me at time. Up next, yeah, we're working on transparency control for voice-first devices. I'll be back here in Berlin in 2 weeks. So if you're interested in engaging with us, collaborating, potentially, we're still recruiting some spaces, I think, for that. You can talk to me and Sophie in Berlin in 2 weeks. And then we'll be working in, I think, Brazil and Seoul and in India as well across the series, and looking at things like beyond memory toward broader recall or wider kind of scope. And you can find our work at teachclabs.net. We try to publish as much as we can, and we'll publish a set of these findings, I think, in the next week or two, or maybe this week. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.